These two episodes really get me to think about motivation and manipulation and even simple honesty. And it's kind of odd, or at the very least cynical, that honesty would come third on that list of possibilities. But it is Attack on Titan after all, and so far the expected never seems to be, and not very much turns out to be what it seems. So let's get to it. So at the beginning of this two episodes, 11 and 12, well, at the beginning of episode 11, Pixis seems all in on this high risk, and I'm just going to go ahead and say kind of poorly thought out plan to use a friendly Titan to move a huge boulder and seal a hole in the wall. And along the course of these events, we do get a few glimpses into exactly why Pixis is considered to be eccentric, or maybe if we just put it a little bit more plainly, why he's a little bit crazy. Like one example that we see pretty early on is that he picks a soldier to be in charge of this special force that he's sending out, solely based on his ability to judge a drink, or at least that's how he presents it. Maybe there's a little bit more going on and he just wants people to think he's crazy. But right now I'm kind of buying into the fact that he's a little bit off-center, eccentric. And then also, after talking about the importance of being able to judge a drink, we see that he offers Eren a swig from this flask that he keeps pulling out of his coat and drinking from. And it seems like this drink doesn't agree with Eren very much because he kind of gags on it, spits it out, makes this ugly face. And I wonder if the way Eren reacts to this drink, if this reaction is telling Pixis something about Eren, or if it's some way to judge his character. I wonder if Pixis is giving him a bad drink on purpose to see if he tries to act like he likes it when he does it, or is this just straight up a drink and it shows us that maybe Eren isn't the person Pixis thinks he's supposed to be? Like, is it telling the audience something? I don't quite know, but they do dwell on it for a minute, so I think it has to be saying something to somebody. And in these episodes, we also see that some of the characters are starting to be aware of, or they're starting to be sensitive to some of the things that I've been speculating about so far. Like there's a moment early on when Eren states that the Titans are not our only enemy, which, you know, who else could be an enemy besides the Titans? Well, it would have to be other humans. And since all humanity is now together in this one society, it means that there's an enemy within that might be more threatening to the existence of humanity, or at least humanity as they know it in their time, more of a threat than the Titans, which are that threat from without. So it's good to see that there are some characters in this world and in this universe that are perceptive or suspicious of some of the things that me, from the outside watching, start to think about and have a little bit of suspicion of. So it's a little bit of a validation to the audience, or certainly it was to me. I saw it that way. And it's also telling us, look, these characters aren't idiots, because, you know, all too often it seems like to keep a story moving in the direction the storyteller wants it to go, they have to kind of write their characters as idiots. Clearly not the case here with Attack on Titan. And then something that really put a twinkle in my eye when it happened, and I was really happy to see, is Pixis talking about like a legend or a legendary story, or maybe it's just like a wise kind of bit of advice that gets passed down. It might be apocryphal, it might not be real, but he says something to the effect that once upon a time humans were spread all over the world, you know, much like they are in our real world, with different people, different cultures, different nations, etc. And they were always fighting with each other, which isn't, you know, that far off from something we can relate to. And he shares this old theory that if a non-human threat would appear, that it would unite humanity together for like a single cause. And the first thing I thought when I saw this is very reminiscent of Watchmen and of Ozymandias' plot in Watchmen. I know a lot of folks are familiar with Watchmen, very influential story. And that's the first thing I thought about, is how that is kind of like the plan there. And maybe it's left open-ended in Watchmen. It seems to work in the short term, but there are things to suggest maybe it doesn't work in the long term. Well, this shows us that, and even Eren says it himself, that we're so far from united here. But also just sharing that legend, when Pixis shares that story, that little idiom with Eren, that certainly feeds my crackpot conspiracy theory that I've been like chewing on and talking about for at least the last 3 or 4 videos that I've done here about Attack on Titan. But this idea that maybe the Titans were manufactured and that the Titans are actually a man-made threat that is sort of a secret, like the origin of the Titans is a secret on purpose because it would undermine humanity's faith in their leadership or something like that. And it could still go more than one way. In fact, this story adds a new dimension to my crackpot theory that I didn't have before, because I had imagined them as a weapon of war, and that is still a possibility. I mean, there's a talk that war was widespread in the world back when we still had multiple outcroppings of human cultures and human civilizations and multiple nations. So it's always possible that one nation created this weapon of war, this Titan that they couldn't control, and it led to the society we're seeing now. But now the more interesting aspect I start to think about with his theory is, did somebody try to test that theory? Were the Titans created as sort of a boogeyman, sort of a threat, an existential threat to cause humanity to draw together? But unfortunately, whoever or whatever created this threat did just a little too good of a job, and as a result, what was supposed to be a manufactured threat became a very real threat, and now they're facing annihilation and extinction of humans from something that was supposed to strengthen humanity's oneness or unity. It really seriously looks to have backfired, and I'm going to ride that horse all the way to the barn, so to speak. I might be totally off on this idea that Titans were manufactured, but I've chosen this hill to die on, so I guess I'll go down either in a blaze of glory or humiliation, depending on how it plays out. And like I said, Eren does point out that humanity is far from united now, so no matter how the design was for these Titans, if it was a manufactured threat, it's backfired no matter how you look at it. And this episode shows not only on a macro scale, but on a micro scale, humanity is definitely far from united here. Because we see a lot of dissension in the ranks from the soldiers that are still in Trost, and they're down there sort of organizing for this last-ditch mission for the city. And we see, really, there's a pretty large-scale desertion brewing among these soldiers here. I mean, it's really rolling into motion. It looks like a ton of folks are getting ready to leave the scene. We see some officers ready to pull their blades out and execute the traitors or the deserters, or however you want to phrase that. But in the midst of this desertion wave, Pixis steps up on the wall, and I don't know how he has this booming voice without like a microphone and an amplifier, but he has this booming voice that immediately catches everybody's attention. And he says something brilliant, or at least I thought it was brilliant in the moment. I guess ultimately whether or not something is a stroke of genius or lunacy kind of ultimately comes down to the result. And as it stands at the end of episode 12, the results do seem disastrous, but I guess I really don't know yet because the struggle for Trost is not quite over yet. But what Pixis does to quell this desertion is to tell everybody that they're free to go. You know, if you want to leave, please do. You'll be pardoned for the crime of desertion if you leave now before the next stage of the fight starts. Tells them if they don't want to be there, they'll just get in the way. And now, this statement from Pixis, like I said, at the moment it struck me as a stroke of genius or brilliant, and I think my words got mixed up when I did the reaction and I first said jilliance, which is genius and brilliance mixed together, but not a real word, so I had to kind of cut that out. But suddenly they're feeling like they have a choice. And as soon as it seems that nobody's forcing them to fight, then all of a sudden they're more willing to stand and fight. And now, I can understand this. A lot of people don't like being told what to do, and there's long been a certain thought, among leadership that volunteer armies probably fight harder than conscripts do. But Pixis also adds a little bit of a threat to go along with this freedom. He says that if they don't stay and fight the Titans now, it's no big deal because they'll get another chance to fight the Titans when the Titans come to their home and try to kill their families. And this is when I start to think, is this incredible motivation? This seems like a great way to motivate the troops. But then I start to think about like the reverse psychology of it. And it's like telling them they have to stay, they don't want to. But then when you tell them that they can go, then they still don't want to. Like they don't want to be told what to do. There's that certain part of obstinance that's a basic part of some people's psychology. So when you look at the reverse psychology side of things, and also when he mentions the family, that really puts that exclamation point on it. Well, it feels a lot more like manipulation to me than just simply motivation. And to be fair, I guess manipulation is just a type of motivation, but manipulation is a type of motivation that carries a much more negative connotation than something like an inspirational speech or what have you. There's a difference in rallying the troops with words of bravery and proud tradition and courage and how the fate of humanity is on the line and manipulating them using reverse psychology like this. So is this manipulation or is this motivation? Like I said, manipulation is maybe a less respected type of motivation. You know, there's a lot that could be here, and honestly, I think it's vague enough that it's not entirely clear. It's open to your interpretation. And then, you know, if we want to go back to the simplest parts, and you think about this common threat theory, you know, the unification of people from an outside threat, manipulation is something that was tried here and it backfired horribly. Like this common threat theory that Pixis talks about, if that is how the Titans were created, that was an attempt at manipulation to get humanity to stand together, and it went horribly, horribly wrong, and they're in a bad position. But manipulation is on my mind after that statement from earlier and thinking about that. So I can't help but see manipulation again here. And as a story device, if you're using manipulation, I expect to see bad consequences of that. And like I said, it's kind of cynical, says a lot about me. The fact that the possibility that Pixis is just crazy enough to be genuine in this moment, that he might just be speaking honestly and not have any kind of ulterior motive here. You know, maybe he really does believe that the soldiers who want to desert will cause more problems than they're worth, and he just wants to get rid of them. You know, maybe he is just being honest. I think I could probably see somebody build a really strong argument for just the simple truth of that position, that it should be taken at face value and it's genuine. But I just don't think that's the truth to Pixis. I don't think his intention is really just straightforward, noble communicating. He thought, you know what, the best policy would be to let the deserters leave. I just don't think that's Pixis's truth, even if maybe it is a greater truth. But regardless of what he's going for and what his intentions are, he does succeed in convincing the would-be deserters to stay. It looks like they all stay from what I can tell on the show, but I don't know if there's going to be an overall benefit to humanity from it. Like, if this is manipulation, then sort of the morality of storytelling says it should be a net minus and not a net plus. But this story that we're watching and that's unfolding before us doesn't seem to follow any kind of narrative formulas that I'm familiar with, so nothing is off the table here. But I have to ask myself, if there are heavy casualties in Trost, if this mission fails, would they, you know, the would-be deserters, if they had deserted, would they maybe have been better for what's left of humanity if they'd withdrawn and they helped stiffen the defenses of what's left? I don't know the answer to that, because at the end of episode 12, this situation isn't resolved yet, and I guess only time will tell. But I'm definitely on the lookout for manipulation on this show at this point, and especially manipulation of the audience, because I no longer feel like I can trust my own emotions or my own instincts when watching this show. This show's absolutely, like I said, created an original narrative structure. It seems to avoid predictability at every turn. It's a bit strange to me that being manipulated emotionally can be so satisfying. I mean, wouldn't you agree? It's definitely keeping me engaged and makes me want to rush to the next episode, and the next episode makes it so much fun to talk about, and I never would have dreamed that perhaps being manipulated in this way would be so satisfying. That's, I guess, an individual decision. Another thing that Pixis says is that Eren is the product of the government's Titan transformation program. Now, I've reached the point of cynicism where something that seems like an obvious truth, well, I look for the lie in that. And also, like on the other hand, conversely, when I see an obvious lie, well, then I want to look for the truth in it. There's truth in the lies, there's lies in the truth, and again, I'm looking for manipulation. So then I start to ask myself, is what Pixis says here the truth? And I kind of think it might be. Now, Pixis might not know it's the truth. Eren may not know it's the truth. But if any of my crackpot theory proves correct, this attempt at subterfuge may actually be the truest statement we've seen from Pixis while he's up here on the wall. So let that sink in for a moment. This really is a government plan. Grisha really is on it. Eren really is the product of this plan. This is exactly where the plan wanted Eren to be at this time and in this situation. Even though Pixis thinks he's playing the hand he's dealt off the cuff, he doesn't know that that deck was stacked when that hand was dealt. I mean, he may be ignorantly telling 100% the absolute truth here. And I think that's just so much fun to think about. Probably not necessarily true, but it could be. And that keeps me engaged. Like I said, just let that sink in, that this world is so behind the scenes manipulated like a spider's web that you can't even lie successfully because you accidentally tell the truth. I love that. We see Armin set his tactically gifted mind to work on this mission ahead. And he comes up with what seems like a great plan to me. You know, you have a big mass of humans to draw the Titans into a predetermined location, into a corner nonetheless, where you have hidden cannons set up, ready to blast the Titans away with cannons when they all congregate in that corner. Meanwhile, you've got just a small elite bodyguard for Titan Eren out there while he tries to plug up the hole. It sounds like a brilliant plan to me. But admittedly, I'm no tactical genius. I have like zero combat experience. But I did watch a whole lot of G.I. Joe cartoons growing up, so I think I know a little bit about it. But I love this mind, this brilliant mind we're seeing develop with Armin. And you know, when I first saw the mention that he was brilliant and that he was really intelligent and that he had this gifted mind, well, I thought it was going to be like an inventor, like he was going to invent some scientific device or he was going to come up with some kind of chemical formula. I didn't realize he was going to be this tactical genius. And I love this because this is a character type I don't feel like I've seen a whole lot, especially in a young person. I can think of one really good example, and I know that Orson Scott Card, the guy who wrote Ender's Game, I know he's a controversial writer. Some of his stated beliefs are absolutely in conflict with my own, but Ender's Game and the character of Ender, well, I think he created the best example of a literary figure that I can use as a basis of comparison for Armin, or to make me familiar with sort of the direction that Armin is going in on this show. And I really enjoy Ender's Game. You know, I first read it a long time ago before I knew anything about the author at all, and I've continued to reread it from time to time because with Ender, we get this totally different type of soldier given to us. And I see parallels between Armin and Ender. You know, Ender is smaller and weaker than the other cadets he's training with, but his tactical and his strategic mind really put him like above all of them. And so often with stories about heroic soldiers or successful soldiers or these chosen one stories, well, they tend to be focused more on characters with the gifts and talents like Mikasa has here, like the real killing machines, the ones that are great with their skill or great with their gun, super strong. And I get a real joy from seeing people like Armin, people with this big picture gift, kind of seeing his brilliance in action. Well, it's always going to enhance my enjoyment of this show. And I wonder if eventually, like, Armin will rise to a position with even more authority than what Pixis has, because he really seems to have that potential. And I also wonder with Armin just how much, like, his decisions will strangle his soul, because he's shown to be really empathic also along the way. So I just can't wait to see how this plays out with Armin. These are all just like great story possibilities to hope for. But Pixis talks about an event from 4 years ago, or 4 years prior to these events. And it's a failed mission to retake Wall Maria. And it ended up having this ulterior motive, because the population couldn't sustain itself in this limited space after Maria fell. You know, they lost 30% of their land, but only 20% of their population. And it turns out that the deaths that resulted from the mission, well, those were considered to be necessary deaths by the powers that be for the survival of humanity. You know, I speculated on that. It's certainly in line with my cynicism also that the ruling powers just using these military expeditions to decrease the population. And by decreasing the population, they're decreasing the strain on resources. And that, of course, is part of my suspicion about why the best soldiers are kept away from the heart of the action. They need a certain casualty rate. And Pixis just reinforces that. But again, whenever Pixis speaks the truth, I've got to look for the lie in it. So maybe this isn't true. Maybe my theory's off a little bit. Maybe the very fact that he says this, appearing to reinforce my theory, is all the evidence we need to disprove my theory. Who knows? Once again, I just have to keep watching and see if I get any more clues to this. Now, something I didn't get is, you know, as this mission is underway and Eren is charging off to get into his position, there's this character, Rico. And she keeps referring to Eren as being coddled and pampered and privileged. I have no idea where she gets this impression, because for all practical purposes, Eren is an orphan. You know, his mother's dead, his father is only like heaven knows where. We haven't seen Grisha since episode 1. Eren's all alone, he's abandoned, he's a refugee. So why is she calling him pampered? I just don't know where this is coming from. And maybe, you know, just maybe she knows a little bit about his history, and this all goes back to the fact that when he was living in the area by Wall Maria, his father was a doctor, so maybe he did have a little bit better life than the average person in this society. But I don't know if she would know that. And then my mind starts going all back to motivation versus manipulation, that whole undercurrent running through these episodes. So is she just saying these things to try to motivate him? She's saying these things to try to manipulate him into behaving a certain way? I don't know, but I don't see that there's much evidence for her to think he's pampered, so I think she's just trying to push his buttons here. Or maybe she's just being honest, like maybe she just really dislikes him, and she's making assumptions, like assumptions based on possibly these deceptive and misleading words and actions from Pixis. Once again, the fact that it's just to be taken at face value is always last on my list at this point when I'm watching the show. But it could be true. But in the end, I just don't know, because I really don't have a grasp on this element of Rico saying that Eren is coddled at all. But the mission finally gets underway. Eren bites himself and he becomes a Titan. He looks at the boulder because that's what his mission objective is to move this boulder over to the wall and plug up the hole. But then he turns and he attacks Mikasa. So what happened here? Like, why did Eren react this way? Now, the first thought I had is that a few minutes before, Eren was annoyed with Mikasa's insistence that she go with him. He wanted her to be far from harm's way. He didn't want her to be going with him. So maybe there was some remnant of that annoyance that led him to lash out at her. But then I also wonder if it's like an Incredible Hulk situation, in which this transformation just causes rage to take over. And I wonder, like, will Eren ever be able to control this? And I also wonder, like, how was he able to seemingly control his actions when he first transformed? And then maybe he didn't control his actions. Like, maybe it was just circumstance. Once his rage took over, he took the rage out on Titans because they were the biggest targets in his area. And since there weren't really any other Titans this next time he transforms, he doesn't have Titans to lash out at, so Mikasa's the nearest thing, and he lashes out at her. I still think we have a lot to learn about Eren as a Titan. Also, when we think back to Eren's first transformation, just prior to that transformation, he'd been immediately fighting with Titans. I mean, he got chomped by a Titan, and that led to him transforming for the first time. So maybe that aggression towards the Titans just carried over. And then prior to this second transformation, I guess technically his third, but that second, he was kind of an inanimate object. But just before this most recent transformation, he had been annoyed with Mikasa. So maybe that annoyance with Mikasa carried over. So she was the target of his rage at that point. One thing that's clear is he doesn't have full control over his faculties at this point when he becomes a Titan. But regardless of why or how or what the reason is, this mission really appears like a colossal failure at this point, and that pun was fully intended. Now, I've got to say, even though I'm rooting for Eren, and I want this mission to succeed, and I'm heartbroken when he attacks Mikasa, from a storytelling perspective, I'm glad that caveats and limitations have been placed on his power. Special powers or abilities, well, they need to have restrictions, they need to have limits, they need to have weaknesses for a story to remain engaging. Brandon Sanderson, a writer I talk about all the time in my videos, well, he said that the limits of power are actually more interesting than the powers themselves, and I agree with that. Because without limits, the powers are like the easy solution to every problem. Consequences are reduced, conflict dissolves, and the stories become predictable, and I think it's fair to say that predictable stories can quickly become boring. That's why I think overpowered characters are so hard to write well, and they often end up in these unsatisfying tales. And, nothing is universal, so of course there's going to be exceptions to this, but I think those exceptions are very few. Now, there's a sequence here that I've watched twice, and I still don't entirely have all the details from it. I don't quite understand how it gets from point A to point B. But Mikasa dangles in front of Eren's Titan face, and he tries to punch her, and then she dodges, and he punches himself in the head, and he knocks himself out. But what I don't quite follow here is then we look at Titan Eren in his unconscious slump there on the ground, and both of his hands look like they're missing. I have no idea how he lost both hands in this. I could see losing one hand, I don't get how he lost both. And we also see, and Mikasa points it out just in case you don't appreciate it, but Eren's wounds, Titan Eren, his wounds are not regenerating. And this lack of regeneration is something that nobody seems to have a reason for. Perhaps this is just another limitation to his power that we'll get to explore as the story unfolds, but I really don't grasp what's going on in that moment. And another downside that we see to Eren's powers, like these downsides to Eren becoming a Titan are really stacking up quickly, but he seems to attract other hostile Titans to him, so he becomes a really big target. They know something's not quite correct with the Titan version of Eren. And we also see Eren's perspective during these events, specifically when he's knocked out and on the ground. And he seems to be captured in kind of like a honey trap. You know, he's captured in this sort of a delusion of paradise. He sees this ideal world where his family's all back together and they're living safely and the lighting is even soft lighting and he's taking a nice little nap wrapped up in a cozy warm blanket. And this makes a pretty good point. You know, it's easier to hold someone in a prison if that prison's disguised as heaven. And it's clear now that Eren is really going to have to work on his focus and his concentration if he's going to be able to go into this Titan state and accomplish any kind of goal-directed activity. But the big question remains, like, how exactly does one train for something like this? It looks to me like it would be really hard to practice this, so we just have to see. But once again, my guy Armin, he steps up, he refuses to give up on his friend, he stabs the Titan in the nape of his neck near the spot where Eren is sort of stationed or positioned inside of the overgrown Titan body. And Armin goes ahead and brings up some key memories about how much Eren wanted to see the outside world and asks him why and gets him to think about it. He sort of pulls him out of this reverie here. But I guess we're going to have to wait to the next episode to see if any of this seemingly failed mission can be salvaged. I'm super eager to see it, so I'm going to wrap this video up and get on with it. I'll talk to everybody soon. There's truth in the lies, there's lies in the truth. There's truth in the lies, there's lies in the truth.